Hi, this is Valerie Leonard again. I'm the founder of nonprofit Utopia. I want to welcome you to lesson 4 of Lasting Impact, Building Sustainable Organizations. We're going to be talking about profitable organizations. And before we get started, I want to remind you that if you have not yet done so, please download the workbook. Go to lesson 4. You should have notes there. And then afterwards, there should be a quiz. I invite you to follow along, take notes, and then complete the quiz afterwards. In our third lesson, we covered the working definition of productive as it relates to this course. We also talked about the characteristics of productive organizations and talked about the typical activities in which productive organizations engage. At this point, we're going to cover the working definition of profitable as it relates to this course. We'll discuss the characteristics of profitable organizations, the top indicators of financial health, and talk about the principle of the triple bottom line. So let's talk about the traditional definition of profitable. So simply put, a profitable organization is one that has money left over after all the obligations for the accounting period have been paid. And when we talk about accounting period, that could be a period of a month. It could be a period of 3 months, which is the equivalent of a quarter. It could be the period of 6 months. It could be a period of 1 year. But whatever your period is, you want to make sure that there's more money coming in than money going out. And the way you calculate profitability is total revenue less total expenses. Now, when we deal with nonprofits, they don't necessarily call this a profit. For them, we're looking at net assets. So the rough equivalent of profit for a nonprofit organization is the change in net assets. So the characteristics of profitable organizations include the fact that they have boards and staff that safeguard the organization's assets. So they're good stewards over the assets. And they're making sure that there's accountability for the financial assets and making sure the programs that are generating the revenue are running smoothly. So they're good financial stewards and they ensure that their organizations have sufficient resources for the organization to meet their missions. So let's look at the top indicators of financial health. We'll start off with the statement of financial activities, and that is roughly the equivalent of an income statement. So the nonprofits use statement of financial activities instead of the income statement, but it provides similar information. So profitable organizations have reliable revenues, and that means basically they are able to reliably predict the revenue streams on a consistent basis, either monthly or quarterly, and from year to year. The revenue streams are relatively stable, so that means they know how much money is coming in, where it's coming from, what funder is going to pay them what. If it's a city grant, they know when the payment should be coming in from the city. If the money is coming from an annual fundraiser, they should be able to predict when that money might come in. And healthy organizations have consistent surpluses over the years, and the revenues cover the full cost of doing business, and that includes day-to-day operations, debt service, and depreciation. So when we look at debt service, we're basically saying, can we cover principal and interest payments in addition to what it costs to keep our lights on? And then depreciation, that's the cost of your equipment being used over time. Another place you want to look as an indicator of financial health is the balance sheet. And for nonprofit organizations, this is called the Statement of Financial Position. So profitable organizations have strong asset coverage. And when we look at what asset coverage is, that is the ratio of assets to liabilities. And basically, that's the ratio of things that give value to the things that pull cash and value away from the organization. So a good way to look at it is things like cash, investments, your property, plant, and equipment, those types of things that add value to the liabilities. And that would include things like depreciation, any bills you have to pay, any mortgage you have to pay. And ideally, the ratio of assets to liability should be 2 to 1. So that means roughly for every dollar that you have, you want to be in a position that you're paying, you have twice as much value, twice as much money coming in as going out, right? So anytime you get to below 2 to 1, you can find yourself in a very um, cash strap situation. For example, if you have asset coverage of 1 to 1, that means for every dollar you have coming in, you've got to pay it immediately, right? And some organizations are in a position where their asset coverage is even lower than 1 to 1, meaning that what they owe is significantly higher than what they have coming in, and they're operating at a deficit. And when you get to the point where you're operating at a deficit or you owe more money than you have to pay, your programs are gonna be compromised, because money that you would be using to generate sound programs has to go to pay off debt. And generally speaking, nonprofits should have enough unrestricted cash to cover at least 3 months of expenses. So when we're talking about unrestricted cash, we're talking about cash that is not tied up in programs. Generally speaking, when organizations get grants, the money is restricted for a specific purpose. And in an ideal sense, you want to have 3 months of cash that's not tied to any grant in order to cover your expenses for 3 months. And when we look at the reality is most organizations are not in that position. The Nonprofit Finance Fund in 2015, they did a study and they found that 53% or more than half of nonprofits had 3 months or less cash on hand. And I know, in states like Illinois, where organizations depend very heavily on the state for funding, there are many organizations that were in a much more critical position than this. So let's look at the triple bottom line. The triple bottom line is an accounting framework that was developed by John Elkington. He's an expert on corporate responsibility, and back in the mid 1990s, he was looking at other ways to measure shareholder value beyond just profitability, the bottom line, so to speak. So he went on to develop a framework, the triple bottom line, where he looked at not only the measures of profit that include things like return on investment, shareholder value, and all that good stuff. He expanded it to include environmental factors and social factors. So by focusing on comprehensive investment results, that is, respect to profits, people, and the planet, the triple bottom line reporting can be a very important tool to support sustainability goals, your long-term ability to make an impact on your community, your staying power, so to speak. So let's look at the 3 spheres of sustainability. The 3 spheres are environmental, and that includes things like natural resources, environmental management, pollution prevention, things focusing on making sure we have clean air, clean water, that we don't abuse our land and we're handling our waste appropriately. The second sphere is in the economic realm, and that focuses on profit, cost savings and efficiency, economic growth, research and development. And the third sphere is social. So we focus on things like wages, the standard of living, education for our workers and in the workforce, community, and equal opportunity. And the sweet spot where all three of those intersect would be sustainability. Now, there are areas where there's overlap between two of the spheres, but not all three. And for example, that area where the environmental sphere overlaps with economic, we find things like focusing on energy efficiency, subsidies and incentives for the use of natural resources. In that purple area where we find the intersection of the social and economic, we usually find things like business ethics, fair trade, and workers' rights. When we look at the orange area, which is the intersection of the environmental with social, there we find where we're operating in environmental justice, natural resources stewardship, both locally and globally. So this is a framework that Vanderbilt University put together, and this is basically the way social enterprises, both for-profit and non-profit, would tend to operate. So here is a real-life example of an organization that has actually used the triple bottom line methodology, and this comes from the European cities marketing. All right, so they looked at the social impact, the socio-cultural impact, and the environmental impact of the work that they do. So on the economic side, they found that the positive effects included things like revenues for the community, tourism was promoted, and you had stay-homers. About 34.9 million direct economic tourism net, and the negative effects were leakage. On the social side, the positive effects were they had welcoming and open festival. They had more entertainment in the city. They looked at the fact that there was impact on the music scene. They had improved their reputation and status. There were more jobs locally. Friends and family could socialize. People could meet new people. There was an impact to local resources. They focused on local resources and the skills of the people in the area, and they increased local pride. Now, the negative effects were congestion and increased noise levels, to the people, in the local area. And on the environmental side, they found that there was littering. And for the ecological footprint, they found that there was 0.06 GHA per visitor, 1658 GHA total, which is 2.25 times the normal consumption. So what's the current thinking regarding the triple bottom line? So there's still interest in the triple bottom line, and accounting has been growing across the for-profit, nonprofit, and government sectors. And many businesses and nonprofit organizations have adopted the TBL sustainability framework to evaluate their performance, and a similar approach has gained currency with governments at the federal, state, and local levels. However, there are challenges to putting TBL into practice, and that includes the fact that there's no uniform measuring for this, because different organizations have different goals and objectives. Different sectors have different goals and objectives, and it's very difficult to find a uniform measurement across, across the board that everybody can use. So basically, if you use triple bottom line, the onus is going to be on you to develop your own benchmarks and be able to justify them. And that could cut both ways, positive or negatively. But the TBL framework allows you to evaluate your work, from 3 different dimensions, which can be pretty powerful in a fundraising narrative. So if you have any questions regarding this course, you can email me at ValerieFleonard@nonprofitutopia.com, and you can post in the course forum, if you're a Nonprofit Utopia member. And if you have not yet joined, consider joining us. You can go to our website at nonprofitutopia.mn.co. Follow us on Twitter and find us on Facebook. And when you find us, be sure to like us. So as I close out, I want to remind you to do your notes, do your quiz, and then I will see you on the other side.